Today I'm adding softness to 3D embossing with a faux velvet look. Hello there, Michelle Short here with Terrific Tags with Michelle. I'm here on the Altenew YouTube channel twice a month, so if you enjoy my videos I'd love for you to subscribe. So let's get started. I'm using the Craft Your Life project kit Garden Whispers today. In the kit you get a stamp set with beautiful images and lots of sentiments. There is the coordinating die set, the 3D embossing folder, which is what I'm focusing on today, and also coordinating stencils. The stencils do coordinate with both the embossing folder and the stamp set. I'm creating a tag today, so I have cut one of the larger Terrific Tags dies from Classic Crest £110 solar white cardstock. I've placed that down onto my sticky mat, and now I can add some ink blending on top using the Bubblegum Dreams Fresh Dye Ink collection and a small blending brush. I want to focus most of the darker colour towards the bottom and also the left hand side of this tag. So I'm starting off with the lightest shade, and my tag is adhered really nicely onto that sticky mat, but unfortunately my sticky mat is moving on my craft mat that's underneath it. So I do apologise that I'm having to try and keep that in place as best as possible as I'm doing the ink blending. Most of the time it does stick really nicely to my craft mat, but I've probably got a little bit of dust or something like that on it, and so it's not sticking so well today. I went in with a light layer of the lightest shade, and now I'm going in with the second lightest shade, focusing this darker colour towards the bottom and that left hand side, as I said. I do want to try and get a really nice transition between all of the three shades, but at this point I'm not too concerned with how sort of smooth it looks. I'm bringing in the embossing folder so I can see how far up I want that darker ink to be. And I feel that it needs to go up a little bit higher on this tag, and I'm just going to have the very top right hand corner be the lightest shade. I can then go in with what is the second darkest shade in the collection. I'm not using the darkest shade today. And again, I'm just really darkening up those areas towards the bottom and the left hand side. As these inks dry, they do tend to kind of blend into the cardstock, and you get a much smoother blend with the ink. So like I say, I'm not too concerned if it looks too perfect at the moment. To add even more darkness to the tag, I'm going in with the Midnight Violet colour from the Shades of Purple collection. I decided to go in with the purple rather than the darkest colour in the Bubblegum Dreams collection, because that one is a little bit more on the red side, and I wanted it to look a little bit more like it was like a really dark magenta. And this purple colour mixes really nicely with these pinks, and I just absolutely love the shade that it creates. I can now pop my tag inside of the Garden Whispers 3D embossing folder. I tend to place it towards the top of that embossing folder so that I can see exactly where that pattern is going to end up. And then once I'm happy with the placement, I can close that embossing folder. I'm then going to run it through my die cutting machine. I'm using the Platinum 6 die cutting machine today. I have got the base plate followed by the shim. I've then got my embossing folder with my tag inside, and then I've got the adapter plate D on top. And I find that this sandwich works really nicely for these embossing folders. So I'm just running that through the die cutting machine. And then I can take the tag out of the folder, and it just looks so pretty. I absolutely love this image here. I did get a little bit of cracking in some areas of the cardstock. Most of the time when I add ink blending onto the cardstock before I do embossing, it doesn't tend to crack the cardstock because you've got that kind of added moisture from the inks. But it did just do it in a couple of areas here, so I went in with the lightest shade of ink just to cover up that white cardstock. And now I'm going back in with that midnight violet shade and just really darkening up those outside edges here on the bottom and the left hand side of the tag. I'm creating a tag today, but this would work really nicely on a card as well. For the faux velvet look, I'm bringing in the Cloud White pigment ink and I'm going to add it to the raised areas of the embossing folder. I do this quite a lot and I really love the technique, but usually when I do this, I tend to sort of blend the ink onto the cardstock, if that makes sense, like I would do if I was doing ink blending, just to kind of give a really kind of blended look, I suppose, but you can see the white pigment ink on top really nicely. But for today, I wanted to go in with kind of like a dabbing motion and using that sponge to my advantage and kind of getting the texture of the sponge. And I think it looks a little bit like velvet or suede. I think it does look really lovely and soft. So I'm going in lots of layers here. I'm not adding too much ink onto the sponge to start with because I found that it works better going in layers rather than kind of just going full force and adding as much of that white pigment ink as possible. The pigment ink is going to show up more on the darker areas rather than the lighter areas, but I do still want to cover some of those lighter areas with this ink as well. So I'm pretty much done with my first layer of ink here. I can then bring in that ink pad, smush a little bit more onto my mat here. Pick that up and then I'm going in here and you can see how much that really does make a difference. I'm still going fairly light-handed. I'm not kind of pressing down that applicator tool very hard, but if you're not getting the coverage you want to, you can definitely press down a little bit more. But again, just going in some layers here so I can add as much of this ink as I want to. It's very difficult to try and take it away rather than add more in. If I get any around the outside edges, I do just tend to remove that with my finger and it comes off quite nicely. The second part of this technique is that you want to mist it with something. So you can do this with water, but I'm doing it with iridescent shimmer ink spray. And you can see that as I sprayed that on, the white really popped away from the inks underneath and you just get the most soft, beautiful, velvety kind of, it's not texture technically, but it kind of looks a little bit like texture. Because I'm using the white pigment ink here, I do want to heat set it with my heat tool. So I'm just heat setting that and then I'm going to set that aside to dry. And I did get some really lovely droplets of that iridescent spray on there as well. And I think that that was a little bit of a bonus. I'm now going to work on my sentiment. So I'm taking the thank you sentiment from the Garden Whispers stamp set and I'm going to stamp that down onto some Crafty Necessities jet black cardstock. So I've just placed that in the stamp wheel. I can bring in the top flip plate of that stamp wheel to pick up the sentiment. I can then prep my cardstock with an anti-static powder tool and I do like to remove the excess powder with a brush. I can then ink up my stamp using embossing ink. This is a clear sticky ink so that when I add the embossing powder on top, it's going to stick to it. So I can just press that stamp down onto the cardstock. And then I can remove the cardstock and add some embossing powder on top. So I'm using a pure white crisp embossing powder today. I do like to apply it a few times, tap off the excess so that I get a really nice coverage. And then I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool. And I do like to heat set from the front and the back. It does help to prevent warping of the cardstock, but it also helps to prevent overheating of that embossing powder. When you overheat embossing powder, it tends to go a little bit grainy and it doesn't really look that nice. So trying to remove that heat tool as quickly as possible once that powder has melted. And if there are any areas that I missed with the embossing powder, I'm going in with a white gel pen just to fill in those areas. I have then cut another tag from Classic Crest £110 Solar White cardstock. I'm adding some glue tape onto the back of that. And then I can adhere that onto the back of my embossed tag. So I'm just trying to line those up as best as possible. You do have some wiggle room with that glue tape, which is really nice. Once I think that they are lined up, I'm just going to bring in a bit of scrap paper just to press that down. And I'm just using the scrap paper just so that I don't get my fingerprints into that ink. And then a couple of areas you could see that white cardstock from the side, so I'm just going in with my scissors there just to cut them down a little bit, just so it looks a little bit neater. I can then take some black twine, tie that through the top of the tag, secure that in place at the front, and then I can tie that in a bow. And I'm just going to fiddle with that bow for what seems like about 5 minutes. Once I'm happy, I can then cut those tails down with some scissors. I have then cut my sentiment out using the coordinating die, and now I'm going to add some instant dimension foam tape onto the back, and I'm using the new size of instant dimension foam tape. This is 1/4 of an inch in width, and it's the same height as the other one, but it's a little bit narrower, so it's really great for sentiments. This sentiment is really quite small, so I am still having to cut some of those pieces down, but it is a little bit easier with this size foam tape than the original size, which is really helpful. I can then remove the backings off of that foam tape with some tweezers. And then I can place that down onto the tag. And I'm just going to place it down really lightly to start with, and then I do tend to kind of bring my head in like right over the tag. Obviously I cut that out of the video, but once I was happy with the placement, just adjusted it slightly, and then I can press that down. And that is the tag finished for today. I did think about adding some embellishments on top, but because that shimmer is just, there's tons of it, it's absolutely beautiful, I didn't really feel that I needed to add any more embellishments on top. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Altenew blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Hey there, Lydia here. I really do hope that you've just enjoyed the video. If so, please subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, turn on the notification bell so you can get your daily dose of crafty techniques and tutorials just like this. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.